Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Impact Room with myself, Perry Fletcher. Today I'm joined with Paul Basigara, who is the Commercial Director and has previously worked for an organisation such as Centrica and British Gas. Paul, thanks for joining us today and we look forward to hearing all about your story. But before we get started, obviously, as I've just mentioned, you spent 20 years at Centrica. Do you want to give us a quick overview, a quick elevator pitch about what you're about and your history?
Yes, certainly. Hi, Perry. What can I say? Well, I'm a leader, a manager, I'm also a dad and a husband and many other things as well. Yes, I started with British Gas 20 years ago. I'd done a few roles before going into that organization. It's a great business. And in my first role with the business, I worked with our fantastic engineers. So they have circa 6,000 people out and about in vans, servicing customers every single day. And I had the privilege to start my career in one of those roles and very quickly moved into leadership and management positions. I think I found that I had a bit of a knack for leading teams. And amongst my roles within the organization, I led some of the big scale multidisciplinary field operations. So I think I've covered about half of the UK now in total. And then most recently, in the last 3 years, I've worked on the revenue generating side. So leading one of the big three product portfolios and having the opportunity to do all things value proposition and making sure that doing for customers what they're looking for.
Brilliant stuff. And obviously coming on to that, I mean, how did you find the transition, say, from being one of them people that is say were on the field yourself to now being that, how did you find, I suppose, that management level transition, but also to how did you manage to gain respect from the senior stakeholders over your time? Because obviously you've, as I say, someone that's progressed through the company, you know, how have you found that in the
That's a that's a great question. I don't think I've been asked that before. I used to talk a little bit about this when I would mentor. Done a lot of mentoring over the years.
okay.
Um, and I worked with a business called Mission Include actually. They do some brilliant work in terms of focusing specifically on ED&I in the workplace and really trying to help people early in their career be mentored into positions of senior
Mm,
success. And when I used to talk with people about it, I always used to say that first and foremost, be curious, you know. So I think one of the things that I've always been is curious. I think the fact that I'm still a student at 42 is probably testament to that. But it's a starting point of just being aware of the fact that you don't know everything. You
mm,
have to be aware of the fact that there's a whole world of things that you can learn out there. And if you're willing to go out and learn stuff and you're willing to meet people and take on board knowledge, then you can do things with that. So once you've learned some new things, you can adapt your approach, you can do new roles, and then before you know it, you're growing into different roles. There is definitely a language difference. That was one of the first things that whenever
mm,
I talk with mentees about this, that almost preparing for the fact that it is a language difference. And
yeah,
I actually like to think of it a little bit like a tabloid and a broadsheet. So, maybe somebody who might read The Sun versus kind of getting into some of the big heavy broadsheets. And if you read an article on The Sun online and then you go and read an article in the FT, they'll be written in a completely different way because they're tailored to a very different audience. The language they use will be very different. The emotion
mm,
and the intent behind what's written will be very different. And that's a bit like corporate world. So that's a bit like the steps and the layers that you move through in organizations. So talking with somebody at the front line who is working incredibly hard to look after customers day in, day out about the investment cycle of your organization is going to be quite difficult. Having a
yeah,
discussion with them about maybe somebody new that's been appointed to the board and the skills and capabilities that they bring and all the previous experience that they had. That's quite a difficult conversation. It's not going to be an engaging conversation. The conversation that that person will be really interested in is the stuff that's important to them. It's the work environment, it's how
Yeah.
customers are feeling about the service that's being offered to them. It's all of those sorts of things. And then, as you rightly so point out, when you kind of move through those corporate layers, you get into that type of boardroom environment. Well, boardrooms predominantly spend maybe 30 to 60 minutes on an agenda item. The agenda will be very detailed. The pre-reads will be sent in advance. There's an expectation about the pre-reads in terms of their quality and in terms of the content that's being shared. You're either talking about a briefing or a decision or maybe a discussion point, but it's very framed. There's corporate politics that comes into play. So
Yeah.
there are those language differences as you
Mm.
move through layers of organizations that are really critical to understand. I think if you can understand the language part and you're comfortable that sometimes it won't always feel comfortable, and you're curious and you're willing to learn from those around you, then anybody can absolutely fly in a career.
No, it's really interesting actually. I've done some stuff myself, and actually, I've been involved in sessions recently around like influencing skills and stuff as well. And I think, to be a key influencer, you have got to be curious, because as I say, that curiosity piece is so true, because everyone will have a different outcome of what they want from something. So you've got to, if you are going to influence, you've got to make what you're saying important to that person. Especially like, if you've been involved in roles where people would have presented data to you and you've had to present data to others as well, looking at that data piece and things. And some people, they do want that. Some people do want to just see the spreadsheet and have all of the numbers. Some people just want the headline and obviously that curiosity to understand that, to be able to communicate, and like you mentioned, say that all comes back down to, that's a really, really interesting point actually that you've just made there on the curiosity. And I think, and I think you say treating people like people is just it, isn't it? Really, like you mentioned, actually, be don't just be. I suppose you say, don't just talk to everyone like they're the same. Everyone does have a different personality, a different, whatever, what their interests are themselves. Um, really
The,
interesting couple of points there.
the vast majority of people you meet as well, regardless of what their
Yeah,
role, the vast majority of people you meet, they're, at some point, they were children themselves. They
yeah,
might be parents. They might be brothers, sisters. They're just people. And it always one of the reasons why I quite like studying actually still is because you go into that environment where you're surrounded by people that are in the work environment. The
yeah,
professionals. So I was at Warwick Business School a couple of years ago for a module, and in the room, you're surrounded by professionals, senior leaders in significant organizations. When they're out of the organizational context, because everyone in the organizational context will have a bit of a persona,
mm-hmm.
when they're out of the organizational context and in more of a learning environment, barriers drop down. They're able and uncomfortable to be themselves, and you realize that even the most steely focused, successful leaders, they're just people like everybody else.
Yeah, no, so true. No, interesting. Okay, fine. So looking at kind of your last few roles, obviously, like you mentioned, you've took on more of this revenue generating, um, and more of a strategic role, than just managing the teams and stuff. I mean, what's been your biggest learnings in your last, say, 5 years of your career, and where do you see that kind of progressing as we move into the next 5 years? Really, I mean, obviously there's a lot. I mean, yeah, it'd be interesting to get your view on. So it's two questions in one, but we'll start with the first one first. How have you found the last 5 years, especially coming through COVID and being this more revenue generating leader?
Mhm.
And then obviously we'll move on to the next one after.
Yeah, let's start with the differences, or my experience of the key differences. Having spent the best part of 15 years in operational management roles, um, the thing that always strikes me is that in operations, predominantly, you will have a very short amount of time to
Yeah,
solve problems that will be at at best probably small problems, medium problems, but you're there really to make sure that the organization works. The customers get what they need, and that doesn't inevitably involve a degree of firefighting and everything else. I used to think of it as a bit of a set of levels, actually, where right at the top you've got those kinds of wicked problems that I don't know
Yeah.
if you coined the phrase, but those really big, complex, and they take a long time to solve. They take a lot of investment sometimes. They take big transformational programs of change. Right at the top, you've got those types of problems. And then at the bottom, you've got those types of everyday problems that are really quick. The goal is just get
Yeah.
them solved straight away. If you've got a customer that has a problem, then your goal is solving that problem ASAP. And then somewhere in the middle, you've got that layer of those medium types of problems. And in
Mm.
operations, really predominantly you're operating in that middle level, and at the bottom, you're there to really make sure things go well. And things are never going
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
go as planned. So you've got to be resilient, you've got to be adaptable, you've got to be able to just get hold of things and get them done. And then at times, you should always make sure that you're kind of passing that feedback up so that the strategic leadership of an organization is able to understand what are the things that are emerging that we might need to
Yeah.
deal with. I think in transitioning from operations into that more strategic revenue side of the business, for me, it was exactly that you absolutely spend far more time in the deep problems, far more time thinking far more broadly about what's happening in the industry and in the market, what's happening in consumer trends, thinking longer term, 3 to 5 years. And actually, in many cases, one of the biggest challenges that one of the biggest things that I learned was moving out of short-term quick decisions, using all your experience to make quick decisions to resolve the problem for a customer now,
Yeah.
into a space where you're really driving far more thought leadership, and you're there's far more ambiguity. It's less, you're almost operating all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
time in gray. Ops is black and white. Everyone loves black and white in operations. It's yes or no. But in that strategic space, you've got to be really, really comfortable in the grey and in the
Mm.
ambiguous, and really actually acting far more like a researcher and a scientist, and kind of going out and studying and understanding problems and thinking about them again and again and getting different perspectives, because the answers that you provide will have far more meaningful long-term value.
Yeah. No, brilliant stuff. And just kind of looking back on that, and obviously, what you've just said. I mean, what I mean, there might be a couple of examples here, but what would you say has been your kind of biggest achievement so far in your career? Um, and somewhat, I suppose, something that you can reflect on, that you kind of look at and go, you know, as a team or myself, with that, what I suppose, what has been the outcome? Or I know obviously you won't be able to share everything with commercials, etc., etc. But what was the outcome for, I suppose, the customer, the employee, um, or what was optimized, if that makes sense?
So I actually think my biggest achievement so far was leading teams through the pandemic. I was talking about this the,
Mm,
the other day. The when the lockdown came, there was, at the time I was in one of the regional leadership roles. So I had a team in London, the southeast, actually, around about 1,500 field-based colleagues, multidisciplinary engineers. And when the lockdown came, immediately the first thing that happened was, obviously, the whole world stopped. And it's a difficult thing to manage when
yeah,
you've got a large workforce whose role it is to go in and out of people's homes. And the reason why, setting a bit of context, the reason why I still feel like it's one of the achievements I feel most proud of is, through that whole period, that initial 6 weeks, we had the contention of customers who were, in many cases, vulnerable. They were without heat, they were without hot water, in a situation that was incredibly difficult. And that's
mm,
one of the things that's unique actually about British Gas. And certainly when I joined that part of the business, the business was always referred to as the fourth emergency service. It was very much seen as doing something that adds social fabric. It was a really important thing in communities. And not only did we have the contention of, well, how do you deal with This fact that we're still going to have people that are vulnerable, that could be at risk. With then the fact that you've got colleagues who could be incredibly vulnerable and at risk, because in order to serve those customers who are vulnerable, you're going to have to inevitably make sure that the colleagues are safe. And that wasn't risk free through COVID. That
No,
was
yeah.
everything. There was no protocol for it. There was no previous experience of it. You're kind of having to best endeavor, work through the right process, and then test and learn those processes. And through the whole period, through the whole period, and it was a lockdown, first one, about 6 weeks. The thing that I'm most proud of is that the team that I had, they didn't miss a beat. We visited all of the customers we needed to visit. We had 0 cases of transmission. And the purpose that ran through the organization was second to none. And it was one of those sort of really rare moments in a career, certainly for me, where you can talk about the purpose actually mattering. You can talk about everybody knew that they played a part in something bigger at that time. And it was incredible, absolutely incredible to be a part of. So I'm really proud to have been able to lead a team through what was one of the most challenging work environments that certainly I've ever seen. But to do it with purpose, to be able to do it in a way that meant that customers and colleagues were looked after, and we're really proud about how we did it. So yeah, I'm definitely I'm a purpose-led leader in many ways, and I have a similar sort of passion for history and in the industry, and I've been the chairman of the National Gas Museum Trust for the last three and a bit years. And in a similar way, we've taken what was a dilapidated, run down, kind of in poor shape, corporate museum, and got it to a place where people come in every day. It's the footfall was higher. People come in and they actually see the history of the industry. And I think when you look at it and you take a step back and go, what we're really doing is preserving for future generations something that's meaningful, powerful messages that are meaningful for them to understand. And so so things like that are just I think they're really motivating from a personal point of view.
No, brilliant. And while we're on the motivation piece, I mean, what's your I mean, obviously you've got a passion for the industry, you've just mentioned, but what gets you out of bed every morning? What is your passion? What drives you? Is it, what could it be, I suppose?
Unfortunately, I'm one of those achievement guys. So
Right.
I see. I know a lot of people who are fairly similar, who go about it in different ways. So there'll be people that run marathons and they'll do 5 marathons a year, and there's people that walk up mountains and all of that sort of stuff. I don't do any of those things. My achievements are much smaller. So I like that. So I jiu-jitsu is my personal hobby.
Yeah.
But for me, that's all about achievements. Even the little things day in, day out that you do. This session, for example, it's a really small achievement. So I am a goal-orientated achievement seeker.
Yeah,
and
brilliant.
it sounds like a fairly narrow purpose. It's not to say that there's not something that's bigger, but I'm quite comfortable with that.
Just seeing the goal, doing it, moving on to the next one.
It
Exactly.
provides that motivation.
Well, that's it, and actually, I mean, like I do a bit of running. I'm not up to marathons yet. I don't know when I'll get up to them, but as I say, I've got a half marathon booked in next week. But as you say, there is no bigger reward, as you say, than completing a task. You know what I mean? But it could be, it could be helping someone to find an opportunity and helping a client to deliver on something from in a work perspective. Someone that's been struggling to achieve an objective, and we're placing top candidates into them, and they go on to achieve that objective. The candidate goes on to have a more successful career, or finishing. I've done the Great North Run twice. I'm doing it third time this year, but I'm doing Birmingham half marathon next week. But getting over that line, all the training, all the hard work that goes into it. But as you say, but it doesn't have to be big things. It could just be, oh, I want to share an experience, or I want to, take the kids to Alton Towers for the day. It's a goal of theirs that you help them fulfill. I suppose just feeling good and feeling, it has such an impact on your life in general. So that's we're a really interesting point of, just as I say, knowing what you want to achieve and just looking at everything in a positive outlay of, yeah, I've done that, and I want to go and do that. How can I get there? How can I do it?
Yeah.
And just ticking off. Well, yeah, well, what a great, yeah, what a
I
great
was
example.
I was talking to my daughter's boyfriend yesterday about this, and for me, it was, I remember reading something years ago that talked about the sort of big and small of it,
Yeah,
and we've all got the moonshot dreams. This element of, you couldn't have put somebody on the moon without at some point going, we're going to put somebody on the moon, and we're going
yeah,
to do all of those things along the way. But whilst it's a bit cliched, it's true. You needed everybody in that program to
yeah,
love
yeah,
the next thing that they were doing. So when you're running in the north, the Great North Run, and in Birmingham next week and doing your half marathon, you might not be thinking about doing a marathon at the
no,
time.
yeah.
Whilst you're doing that run, you might just be thinking, I
But
just
it's
really
all,
want to love
yeah,
this run. I want to love the next round that corner. I know what comes next. I'm going to love that. When we run past the library, that's going to be the highlight of this run. All of those little wins, they all add up then
yeah, yeah,
to the big stuff. And I remember seeing Ant Middleton talk about it a
yeah.
lot in one of his live kind of motivational shows, and he talks constantly about just collecting the little positives, every single day.
It's so true. I mean, as you say, yes, there will be always the bigger goal out there, but the big goal might take. I mean, I've done stuff myself on it, and I've got a vision board. That's some of that stuff on the vision board might take me 10, 15, 20 years to achieve. But as long as every day I'm moving one step forward to the things that are on your vision board, it's it could, like, I know we've got things on there like take the kids to Disneyland. It's, yes, that's something you could achieve in the next few years. But then there's stuff on there that isn't actually. I mean, nothing's never impossible, but you look at it going, that's probably not going to be too possible, because it's not financial. It is a time thing that you do need time to get to that thing. Whether it's, like I've got personal best in running and stuff that I want to. I mean, I've only been running for 18 months, and I've got dreams and goals in my running that at the moment aren't doable today, but with moving one step closer and doing one extra bit of running and running that little bit extra in your daily goals will get you closer to your overall goal. That's really, yeah, I think, and I was actually having a conversation with someone only this week, actually, that was like, they were a bit lost in where they wanted to go with things and what they really wanted to achieve, and that was it, really. I've sent them a couple of things over, like Jen Sarah. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, about like making, it's a book about being a badass and kind of, really getting hold of your grip,
Yes. Yeah.
and then there's a couple of other things and stuff. But I do think there is so much in, that personal self piece that drives people forward more than just, because I think if you don't know where you want to get, and when we speak to candidates and clients stuff, we don't always ask them like, oh, what do you want in the next 12 months? It is, what do you want 5-10 years from now, and what are the steps to take you there? Like when I talk to candidates and register them for opportunities and whatever, the question I always ask them is not what do you want for your next role, what's the job after?
Yeah.
Because your next role is a step to that job.
Yeah.
You could even go one further and go, where do you want to be, or what is the job you want to have done before you retire?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And how are you going to get to that job? So
Very
yeah, it's
powerful
really, really
coaching
interesting. Yeah,
questions then as well.
yeah, no, good. Well, yeah, it wasn't meant to have been, but but really
They are.
interesting,
Yeah.
but really interesting thought process that you've just mentioned. Hopefully people take a lot from it,
Well,
and yeah,
the
but
only reason I came
go on.
across it, I remember, I think it was about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I remember having certainly a period of time where I felt like my personal purpose, if you like, wasn't as clear as it had been.
Yeah.
It was post COVID. I think a lot of people had the same
Mm.
challenge post COVID. You know, you led your life up until that point in the way that it was being led, and everything was the status quo.
Yeah.
And I remember being really clear about my sense of purpose, and through COVID, finding the whole period quite challenging. And off the back of it, I was in a position where I was wondering, what is my new sense of purpose in this
Mm.
sort of new world? You can get really daunted by if you try and envisage it from standing start. It's quite a daunting task. So coming back to that analogy, right? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the moon. So let me
Yeah.
figure that one out. Whereas the tip I was always given, which I think is fantastic, is if you can, instead of thinking about, you always have a vision. Everybody has a vision. A vision's great.
Yeah.
We all need vision. But if you can just think of purpose as more of lots of small building blocks of purpose, rather than just a house of purpose, it's much easier to do. So, again, in doing this session, if I could have this conversation with you, and it's just the best conversation I have today, then that's
Yeah.
fulfilling my purpose. All of those small ones, and it's a great tip for anybody actually that's ever in that position where they're not quite clear what their sense of purpose is. Well, have a bit of a vision, worry about it less, and just make the next thing you do your
Yeah.
purpose.
No, it's so true. Actually, I had a running friend of mine. Actually turned around once and said I was, and it was coming back to, I suppose, that kind of view of, just get on and see it, do it. And he always used to say, like, I said, oh, but how are you going to do that, or how are you going to do that? It's like, just, I say, when it comes to a run, he's like, just book the run and worry about it afterwards. He was like, oh yeah, but it's going to cost me this much to fly to. He was going on to do the Berlin Marathon this year. Unfortunately, he's got an injury, so I don't know if he'll be able to do it. But it was just kind of piece of, just book it and worry about how you're going to get there afterwards. And I suppose it is, isn't it? Have the vision, because that is the long-term vision. You're not going to achieve it tomorrow, but have the vision, and what are the steps every day you've got to take to get to that vision. And as long as you're one step closer every day to that vision, like you said, obviously coming back to where this question started of what is your inspiration, it is your vision of, oh, I'm one step closer to that. Brilliant stuff. Okay, fine. So
I'll share one last anecdote on it
God,
quickly.
yeah, go.
Because I know
No,
we're
go for it.
stuck on this. But one last anecdote. When I, in the very beginning of my career, when I did an apprenticeship and started as an engineer, um, the key to it is the courage to overcome your fear. Courage is like a muscle. You have to kind of like work it. And I would always see engineers who were developing, who needed a bit of support. And they were the ones that would look at a job and say, how am I going to do this? So
Yeah.
they'd spend kind of an hour, 2 hours worrying about how to do a job. The ones who were always outstanding at the job were the ones who were able to look at it, see a daunting task, but break it down into the next step. Have the courage to start the next step and know that all of the steps will emerge as that comes
Follow.
along. It's a muscle. It has to be worked.
Yeah, no, brilliant stuff. Okay, fine. So obviously we've had some recent conversations recently around operations and optimizing operations, and obviously with your last role being in revenue generating, etc., it's all about doing things better, to obviously improve customer satisfaction, to improve the way you operate, to obviously bring in more customers. But it's also about making sure you optimize and you do things as effective and efficient as possible as well. I mean, looking ahead to the next 5-10 years and stuff, I mean, where do you see as the biggest opportunities for businesses to keep growing and developing, really?
Oh, has anybody not mentioned AI? When you've asked that question, has anybody said something else other than that?
No, I don't think they have. Right, maybe. which is obviously, which is great, but I suppose there is a lot of fear over AI as well. And this is, I suppose, where I could rephrase that question a little bit to go, well, what about AI? How do you see AI coming in to be an enabler, or to how do you envisage AI to do something, because we've had very different yes, AI has been the answer most times, but actually it's probably been a very different answer, if
Yeah, in
that makes
terms of
sense, when
how
it comes
it
to,
materializes.
yeah.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
so how, yeah, my
the
camera's just gone off, so I'll just try and reconnect, but yeah.
I suppose from my perspective, if I think about it, look, right, again, it is the over talked about subject at the moment, but it's over talked about for good reason. I actually think it's more of a threat to big business than big business
Mm,
realizes, because you know fundamentally AI and general transformational models and all of the tools that are being developed, they require good data, and they
yeah,
require data that's accessible and stored in the right bricks and all of those sorts of things. And
yeah,
if you're a big business, there's not many that have got that. You would do
it's true.
well to find an organization that says our tech stack is great. Our data storage, its agility, accessibility. Oh, we are just ready for
Mm,
this. You might get maybe an AWS or a few organizations like that where actually they're in the industry, they're in cloud computing, so they're it makes sense, and they've got these data sets and tech stacks that are pretty adaptable. So I think it's a huge threat, because if you think about, well, where is AI? Who is AI going to help the most? There's lots of big organizations that
yeah, yeah,
it probably is them. They probably look at it and go, well, AI is for us. AI is going to absolutely solve any problems that we've got. We've just figured out how to reduce our costs by 20% by introducing AI in all of these different areas. But I don't think that's where it is, because the challenges to introducing AI will be there. And big business is going to have big hurdle rates. They're going to have big prices. They're going to have big choices. Because if you're an existing business with 1 million, 2 million, 10 million customers, well, it's easy for somebody to come in and go, well, here's all the ways you could deploy it. There's going to be infinite ways to deploy it. At some point, you're going to make some choices. And there's no guarantee, given the
yeah,
fact
yeah.
that this is completely new, that you're going to make good choices. Where I think will absolutely make a transformational difference is small businesses and medium enterprises. If you're a small business, um, if you're scaling and you've got less risk around your brand, you've got less risk around your tech stack, less
Yeah.
risk around regulation, and you can move at pace and you can make mistakes. AI and technology developing quickly is absolutely going to help small, medium enterprises scale at pace. And that's the threat. That's the real
Mm,
threat to big business. The real threat is the fact that all of a sudden, if your value proposition isn't brilliant, well, somebody else's will be pretty soon. And the only thing that might get in the way of that other person taking your business is their operational processes, the fulfillment model they've got sitting behind that. But
yeah,
they're coming. And certainly from my point of view, when you look at everything that's happened, business has changed, in the last 5, 6 years. I remember 10 years ago, Centrica at the time announcing a new purpose, a new set of values, a new set of transformation programs, all very long term. And you can look at that and go, okay, well, we're in the status quo. This makes sense. That's
mm,
a good strategy. Whereas now, we're in the new status quo of, it's hard to predict anything. You don't know what's going to happen with commodity prices. You don't know what's going to happen with geopolitical stability. You don't know what's going to happen with
it's
like the
true.
macroeconomic situation. Like, you go and predict it, it's difficult to predict. And so you've got to be more agile. You've got to be far more adaptable. Resilience is another good example, right? But big business
Mm,
doesn't like to build in resilience in process. If you're doing S&OP processes, the last thing you want to be doing is building in resilience to those processes. You want to be building them in the most efficient way possible. Look at supply chains and
yeah, yeah.
just-in-time production and all of that sort of stuff, and strategic partnerships of supply chains. And now, if you're in a business where you've gone, well, actually, our transformation program in the last 3 years has been outsourcing to one supplier in the other side of the world, and they're going to do all of our fulfillment for our widgets.
Yeah.
Well, that now in the current context is a huge risk. So I think the
Mm,
nature of business is just changing. It's just, the SME, the medium enterprise, will be able to be far more aggressive. Um, the situation that we're in, the macroeconomic situation, will continue to be really, really volatile.
yeah.
And so it is it sort of sets the scene almost for just business
Doing it.
people, leadership
Yeah.
needing to be better. You know, you're gonna have to be better. There's lots of good leaders about.
Yeah, interesting. No, it
Organizations need
is.
great ones now, right?
Yeah, no, that's it. And I think, yeah, as you said, I think, like you mentioned with the AI piece, I think as well, technology is moving so fast that if you don't, I suppose if you do decide to take AI on and adopt it in et cetera, or or you manage to get your tech stack into a certain degree, the new things are coming out. You know what I mean, straight away. But you turn it around, like you think 6 months ago, no one knew what AI was. ChatGPT didn't exist 6 months ago. Where now, as we've spoken about, ChatGPT is a household name in everyone's house. Where and I mean, obviously AI has existed for years, and but there is this element now of, as you say, how quick technology is advancing. And I think, you look back, that I think the thing to say about it is you look back and the first iPhone's only just turned 20 years old, hasn't it? Or something in the last, I think it was 2003, the first iPhone came out from. Might be slightly off by a couple of years. But yeah, we are literally talking, we've only had iPhones for 20 years, and the iPhone was one of the first smartphones. It's, you think, where have we come since the millennium? Where is the next 20 years going to take us?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but as I say, it is that case of, but, and I suppose there is that, yes, there is that fear and stuff. And I suppose it is that piece of, but what can we do to help? Because let's be honest, if we don't, if even if we do move forward and if we try, you can't implement it all in one go though. I think that's a great point that you made around, like, look, just use your current tech stack. There is that fear of it. Which bits do we need to use first? Because, as say, you can't, if you try to implement it all by tomorrow, you'd be very bankrupt, but B, it's not possible. And I suppose you're coming back to that vision, isn't it? Really, where do you see that vision? And I think transformation projects are completely different now to where they were. And I think, yeah, here's great points anyway. But fine. So, no, brilliant. I mean, I'm out of questions as such, but is there anything else that you wanted to share, or anything else that, I mean, I know we can move on to the before we move on to the ED and I stuff that you've done as well. Is there anything you wanted to share on the future or anything else in your career, or happy to move on to the ED and I stuff?
maybe the only bit is the so what, so we've had that discussion about
Yeah,
what's happening in the world. So what, I think if it means that for big business there are threats everywhere, and there are, the only way to adapt is being a little bit smaller. It's almost starting
yeah,
to act a bit more like a small business. And
mm,
the way I'm thinking about it at the moment is almost this step of, we had globalization that came about, and supply chains becoming distributed everywhere, and then you had this concept of localization that Tesco coined, where
yeah,
it's a mix of both. Best of global with the best of local.
yeah,
My belief at the moment is that what we will start to see emerging is actually a bit more localization again. How consumers
mm,
shop and how they engage. They're becoming far more aware of the impact of what they purchase, of the supply
it's true.
chains. They're becoming far more interested in their own local communities. You see local groups now going at pace versus the kind of big, when Facebook first came out, everyone's on Facebook, but now the emergence of groups how many years ago, and now the local groups are
Mm,
the ones that are often the most active. So there's this, I think there's this kind of this coming up and scaling up to now almost narrowing back down. The ones that will do really well, I think, are the ones that are able to adapt methodologies and
agile
processes
approach.
from things
Mm.
like lean startup and into big business. If you can be a big business that acts like an entrepreneurial environment, then
It's true.
great.
Yeah, yeah. And that's it. And I mean, coming back to your point very early on in this conversation, businesses do need to be flexible. They do need to be agile. And I say, obviously, as you say, a lot of startups, the reason they are successful is because they can adapt. And like, I suppose, just coming back to what we've just mentioned with the technology changes and stuff, adaptability is key. And you've got to be able to, I think COVID proved that. I mean, overnight, there was organizations during COVID that didn't get the processes and stuff in place and have really struggled to come back because they didn't send office staff home, they didn't get the processes you got in place to allow your engineers still back into people's homes with the right PPE, etc., the process in place. Like you said, you managed to do that quite quickly in that first few weeks of lockdown, where actually is that adaptability that I think is key, because there is organisations out there that are now, I've spoke to some recently that are now really struggling to move forward because they're still in a kind of pre-2020 time frame because they
And
just
culture
didn't
as well.
adapt, and culture. Yeah. Okay, fine. So obviously, I know you're a big believer in diversity and inclusion, and obviously I know you've banged the drum internally at Centrica on that. I mean, I don't know whether you want to just share a couple of points on something you've done at Centrica with the diversity inclusion, or even just maybe your top couple of tips on how people can, because it is something that a lot of organisations talk about. It's something that people want to include more in now. And Hassan, I think coming back to like your point just then on that localization, culture is such a big thing for businesses. I mean, yeah, I don't know if you've got any points you want to share on that.
So it's such a good question. And it's a big question as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not an expert, right? Not by any stretch of the
No,
imagination.
no.
And I know some people that are, and they are just so talented. Um, I think if there was any tips I would give, the first one would be it should still be a debate. I think it's okay to have a debate. I think it takes a lot of courage. I get that, but I think that for a lot of organisations, it must feel uncomfortable to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost this perception that the you know somebody has to be a minority in order to be able to talk about ED&I, and to be able to talk about it with gravitas, and it's not true. It should
Yeah, it's
be
true.
a debate, and the debate doesn't mean everybody needs to agree. It doesn't mean that one person, if they have a view, that they're right either. That's the other thing. Somebody
Yeah.
has a view or an opinion. It's okay to have a discussion and to challenge it and to kind of find a path through that type of really
Mm-hmm.
healthy discussion. And I think there's that's some of that's been sort of lost. You sort of see a
It's
bit
true.
of a almost a bit of a polarization of people on one side, people on the other side. There's probably a lack of debate going on in between, and then there's a few. What I would suggest is sort of knights on the sort of white knights on horses sort of thing. These people that are riding over the horizon of what is quite a foggy landscape and just providing clarity. And those people are few and far in between. As I say, I know a
Mm.
few of them that have done amazing things in organizations, and they really should be celebrated. So that would be number one. Number one is it's still okay to have a debate. I think the second one is probably policies and processes work. If you have
Mm.
good policies that are well written, that are clear, um, and your processes are in line with those policies, then that goes a hell of a long way to making the right environment. It solves everything. Um, I was talking with somebody about LinkedIn about maybe 2 months ago, sort of saying LinkedIn's great, right? You sort of see this. It's a fantastic community, and the connections are great, the resources are great, and everything else. But if I say to you, if you wanted to go and get a job now, where would you go?
Yeah. Well, most people say LinkedIn. Yeah, yeah.
And what did they say? What is it they say when they say go to LinkedIn? What are they asking you to do?
Well, I suppose it's a good point, because I suppose generally it is to go to the jobs page and go and apply for jobs. um,
And use your network, right? How often does
yeah,
that
yeah.
phrase come up?
It,
Use your network.
network. It's true.
It's almost like it's become the status quo in
Yeah, yeah. It's true.
recruiting and hiring practices. Is this sort of this idea that now it's all about networks.
It's true.
Now that is a great thing, but equally is a challenging thing as well. Because if we all have networks, socially, professionally.
Yeah,
If your network is a fixed demographic and it's not going to grow and expand into new
yeah.
areas, how do you recruit? in a way that
Yeah.
is holistic? How do you go and join organizations in a way that's holistic? So I think there's almost challenges emerging as part of the new status quo in the world that we're in right now, that in a roundabout way
Like
could
that.
almost be challenges to organizations really landing that ED&I that they want. Because if anything, it just drives more and more of the bias that policies have been trying to remove for years. You know, a type of confirmation bias, effect bias, all of
Yeah,
those
yeah.
biases
I like
in
that.
hiring practices. And then I think the last bit, the final tip would almost be organizations that get it right will be more successful. You know, I think
It's true.
it's statistically proven time and time again. When you see these organized, when everyone talks about, you know, we've gone through the days of everybody talking about Moda as the example of an organization that failed, and the the Blockbusters and the Woolworths, the organizations that we talk about that failing in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, they won't be those types of organizations because they're easy targets. The organizations
Yeah, yeah.
will be different ones. And in a similar way, the organization's growing. Like, you know, we all look at, everybody always talks about on Amazon. Everyone always talks about Ocado. Ocado. You know, I saw a great example yesterday. OKB, the cryptocurrency platform
Yeah.
that's sponsoring Man City. Um, Incredibly innovative, launching an NFT for shirts that haven't been produced yet. That will give people access to a raffle that will give them one of a few prizes, essentially a loot box. Now, what's clear to me, they're sponsoring a highly successful team. They've got
Yeah.
cash to be able to do that. They're in an area of a market sector that's growing. They've
Yeah.
got a value proposition that's unique. Like, they will fly. I'm absolutely sure about that. Now, I'm also confident if I went into their office space, I think I would find diversity of thinking, diversity of kind of way
Yeah.
of
And that's the
working.
big piece, isn't it? It's
Exactly.
not just necessarily, you know, race or sexuality or
Spot on.
gender, or it is that diversity of thinking. I think, you know, it's cultures, it's everything, isn't it? And I think the diversity of thinking is the piece. And I think we have so many conversations with organisations. It goes, oh, we want to hire more diverse candidates and all this stuff. And I think, and then you do sit there and you go, well, yeah, but you, what are you doing that's different, that's going to attract people with that diverse thinking? That's actually, as I say, it is that piece of, I feel like my voice is going to be heard, and that doesn't matter whether what background you're from.
Exactly.
You know, it is that, like I said, the debate. You know, it what is it that's make you think, well, you know what, I will have a say in that business.
Yeah.
I'm not just going to be pushed to the side.
Do you know,
That's a great
it's a
point.
really great point. Really great point. You'll get calls from people saying, "Hey, we want to hire." I saw one on LinkedIn the other day that was only accepting applications from a particular demographic, and so that's one layer. That's almost like
Yeah,
what
yeah,
you see above the surface. You know, if you say to that organization, "Hey, what are you doing today?" Like, so you can wait 3 months for someone
yeah,
to come in that might bring a different opinion. You could get different opinions today. What are you going to do right now to take your team out of the existing envelope of which they see the world? You know, go and do a social day.
next
You know,
level.
go and
Yeah, yeah,
volunteer at a charity for a day, or you know, go on a hike up a hill. You know, but get different thinking. You know, ask different questions, get different thinking, hear people's real opinions. It's, you know, diversity is as much about, as you say, diversity of thought as much as anything
mm.
else.
No, brilliant stuff. Oh, great stuff. Thank you very much. So, no, brilliant. Hopefully, I'd say that was a really good session. Hopefully, people take something from it. And obviously, going back to our point in the middle of this conversation, that, you know, our goal today is just that hopefully one person takes something from it, and we've achieved it. If two do, we've over exceed. So yeah. So brilliant stuff. So thank you very much for that, and obviously really appreciate you spending the time with us today. Just before you go, I know you've obviously left us Google reviews and stuff in the past, but would you mind just sharing a little bit on your experience with Douglas Jackson as a business and myself? Just before I let you
I
go.
think this sums it up, Harry. Like, for me, this conversation has been hugely enjoyable. I
Yeah.
think the way that the fact that you've reached out and you've organised this session and we're having this type of discussion in a medium that not Many organisations would use. You're asking questions that not many people would ask. It just demonstrates, I think, a really high performing culture. And
Yeah.
so that's how I would sum it up. It's been a genuine
No,
pleasure, actually.
no, brilliant stuff. No, say thank you very much. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure many people will. But I don't know if you got any final thoughts or any final comments to make, mate. But I'm yeah, really happy with that, and we'll get it out into the world, and hopefully people enjoy it too.
Well, it's good to see you.
And you, mate, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, take care.